to Mindshifters. I'm your host, Mireille Wagner, and today on the show, I have Daniela Cook. Daniela is a functional health coach and the founder of Positive Health Space, an online coaching practice aimed at empowering and supporting parents of children with neurodevelopmental issues such as ADHD, autism, and learning difficulties. It's so great to have you on the show, Daniela, to talk about this topic because you have a story, your own personal story, with regards to these kinds of issues. So I'd love for you to start with where it all began for you.
Thanks, Mireille. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And I love sharing these stories because it gives people hope. And I think we need that right now, the way the world is. So my story actually didn't start with neurodevelopmental issues. Well, they kind of were, but I didn't know they were at the beginning. So it started with my youngest child becoming quite ill at the age of 18 months. And she went from being a child that was growing fairly well to all of a sudden one night, I was woken up by this strange noise. And within a few minutes, I realized that that noise was actually my baby in her cot struggling to breathe. Wow. And it sort of, so many things went through my mind. I had one of my older kids had suffered from croup in the past. So I thought, oh, it's croup. And we did all the steam and shower thing. But it was clear that it wasn't really getting anywhere. And so we ended up calling an ambulance. And they arrived just in time. I was out of desperation. I was taking all her clothes off because I didn't know what else to do. And where her chest, sort of in her chest area, it was like concave. It was like she was struggling so much to breathe that her lungs were about to collapse. And I remember her throwing her to the first responders as they arrived. I'm like, do something. And then as soon as the ambulance arrived, they whisked us off to hospital. And there she stayed for 3 days. They threw so many steroids at her. After 2 days, she was breathing on her own, but she sounded like, when you have a train in the background, that's what it sounded like. It was really weird. And they discharged us after 3 days and told us that she just had a virus, and it was one of these strange viruses that worked in reverse. So she had the worst of the episode, the breathing issue. And then as she recovered, she would probably develop a cough and a cold. And we would just have to be very careful not to let her cry or laugh too much because that could trigger another breathing episode. And then they said, oh, by the way, take these steroids. This is how you administer them. And I remember it was dexamethasone. And thank God they gave them to us because this was not an isolated incident. And we ended up in hospital in the emergency room probably every couple of weeks. Wow. And it sort of carried on like that. And basically all they could do to keep her reasonably stable was to just give her steroids. So she was on low dose steroids for quite a long time. And by the time she was 2, she had her first flare of what looked like rheumatoid arthritis, which was then confirmed within a year. And by the time she was 3, she was pretty much a shadow of her former self. She was, apart from the breathing issues, which were sort of ongoing and obviously very limiting, she had fatigue, she had poor balance and coordination. She hardly had any energy. By 3, she started nursery, and to recover from the 3 hours she was spending at nursery, she was sleeping 3 hours in the afternoon, which, wow, none of my other 3-year-olds ever did that. Mm-hmm. She was frequently ill, nothing major, just the sniffles or a little bit of a cold. She was gray, her complexion was gray. She had dark circles under her eyes. And obviously the joints had become an issue. And at that point, she had her bedside table was full of over-the-counter medications, as well as 3 different steroids, which she was taking 4 times a day. Sure. And even with all that, I didn't think she looked well. She certainly didn't act well. And we hadn't resolved any of the issues. And at this point, we're being told, this is when we were then told that clinically it looked like rheumatoid arthritis. And so here's another drug that we need to add to the mix. So that's, for me, that was like, okay.
So you'd been battling with something you had no idea what you were dealing with for 18 months, at least, before you started to look for other answers. Is that correct? Yeah,
so during these 18 months, it's not that I wasn't looking for answers, it's just I was looking in the wrong place. So we'd seen specialists in 5 countries, 3 different continents over that time. And by every single one of them, we were told that the low dose steroids was the only thing that we could do. That was the best treatment option that we had for her at this point. And my only saving grace in this was probably the pediatrician that saw her when he decided it most likely was rheumatoid arthritis, who decided that she was too young at 3 to be put on the rheumatoid arthritis medication. So thank
is that right?
goodness. There was a couple of things that she needed to be on, and he felt that as long as we could manage it with anti-inflammatories and her flares were not too often and obviously weren't getting worse, then we would just manage it and not give her the medication. And that conversation kind of made me think, because what he was basically saying is that A, this medication is very harsh, and B, there is a limit to how much you can give. So what do you do when you've reached the limit? And I was like, but she's 3 and she's got her whole life ahead of her. How does that work? Mm-hmm. So really that was the point where I started thinking there must be something else.
So just give me an idea, what kind of specialists had you been to see in the conventional medicine arena until then?
Various, we'd seen obviously pediatric specialists, we'd seen what do you call them, respiratory, pulmonary specialists, really various, we'd seen allergists, all sorts.
Wow, okay. And all of them had very similar answer in terms of what could be done.
Yeah, because she had no IgE allergies.
Wow.
She had never ever had a gut issue in her life, that we knew about. Although, you know, as a baby, if I think back now, she could never take a bottle, but all her IgE tests were negative. So, you know, as far as conventional medicine was concerned, there was nothing wrong.
Okay, so just give me an idea, because part of that the functional medicine approach is looking at the timeline. So you and I both know that plays a big role, and knowing what you know now, the pieces of her puzzle in terms of timeline, what were the predisposing factors in that time?
So I think in that time, there's definitely, she had a very traumatic birth and she ended up being an emergency C-section. So I think that definitely played a role. I think there is definitely a genetic component, which we only found out about much later. Okay. By the time we found out about it, we'd already done the work.
Resolved.
Yeah. There was obviously the long-term low-dose steroids that she was on. I had no idea at the time how it was affecting her gut. There was the frequent illness. It's not that she had masses of antibiotics, but she certainly had a fair few rounds of antibiotics because she kept getting these, you know, coughs and colds that, and we lived in Singapore for the first year of her life. So, you know, there's a lot of, they worry about mycoplasma and all these things. So, you know, they're quite quick at giving the antibiotic if it looks like it's going that way. Yeah. Okay. So she did have a few rounds of those. So I would say these were probably the biggest things, you know, these over-the-counter meds, the steroids, antibiotics, the fact that she was C-section, and I think a big part, which I don't think I gave enough credit to at the time, was the stress that not being able to breathe was causing her, and it was causing us as a family. So the atmosphere in the house was quite stressful.
And so but her first symptoms, you say, was this not being able to breathe. Okay. And what do you attribute that to? What was it, do you feel? Was that something in the gut health, or what do you think?
So I know now that it is to do with gut health, and it is to do with the immune system. It was an immune reaction. She has IgG mediated anaphylaxis, which is extremely rare, because normally anaphylaxis is connected to IgE, which are the true allergies. But she is highly sensitive to gluten, and as an Italian, I was eating a lot of gluten. I ate gluten throughout my pregnancy and throughout breastfeeding her, and you know, there was gluten available in the house. So it took us a long time to realize that's what it was. But I can tell you, I am now about 99% certain that was the main issue that we were facing. And I know that because after many interventions, the only thing that I've never been able to put back in is gluten. And I now have genetic tests and all sorts of other functional tests that tell me that it is that, but I didn't have those for a very long time.
So how old is your daughter now?
And she just turned 14.
Okay, so this has been a long journey, and
oh yes.
and you're still doing testing as far as I remember from our first conversation. But so, okay, so she turned 3 and you started to figure out, okay, you're not finding answers that you would like to be getting, and you realized that the medication is only going to last so long, to a point where at some stage it might not work. So what were your next steps, and how did you find your way into functional medicine? Was it fairly soon after that, or how?
Yes, it was. So basically after that conversation, because she had another very big flare-up for rheumatoid arthritis at 3. And that's the one that sort of prompted the conversation about medication, because obviously we were now worried that, you know, which way is this going to go? And so it was after that I started thinking, you know, we've got to find another way. And also there was something that never sat right with me, that yes, we now had a rheumatoid arthritis label, but that didn't explain why she wouldn't breathe.
Didn't seem connected, right?
No. And I'm like, well, what, you know, great, but that's not what's happening here. You know, I have a bigger problem. Rheumatoid arthritis is not great, and it's very painful for her. And, you know, on when she had the flare-ups, she couldn't even stand up, and it was horrible to watch. But the reality is that the breathing issue was life-threatening. And so I was like, why is nobody actually addressing this? Mm-hmm. And so I started reading, and I started talking to people around me, and I had a couple of friends who were doing a nutrition course at the time, I remember, and they started telling me all about, you know, these different foods that I should try, and I thought, well, that's easy, that's something I can do. So I'm just going to change her diet. And at this point, I'm not taking anything out because I'm not that far down the line yet. So I'm just making the diet more varied and making sure that there is no such thing as kids food and adult food, and we're just all eating the same thing, and we're eating different things every day, and that's just the way it is. And I can tell you the first 2 weeks were absolute hell on wheels, but you know.
I was just going to ask, because they kids with these on the spectrum tend to be very picky eaters, right?
Yeah. Well, at this point, so at this point, I only have one, and not the one who's sick, who has some neurodevelopment thing going on, and
okay, right.
you know, we're not quite sure what's going on there, but he was okay. But yeah, he was not happy about what was going on, and so I did that, and I noticed a little difference, but
yeah,
in her, well, in all of them, but I was like, you know, maybe I'm imagining it, because it was really, it was like very, very faint.
What
and so
things were you seeing, for example?
So I noticed she had more energy. I noticed that she, her complexion was slightly better. Very, very little things that, you know, my husband said, oh, she probably spent more time in the sun this week or something, you know, nothing that I could say 100%. It was definitely the food. And so, but that led me to, okay, if I can see an improvement in 2 weeks just by, you know, increasing their vegetable intake and all that, so what else can food do? And so I started, you know, going back to my friends that were doing nutrition and saying, okay, what do I do next? And so then I got onto, you know, they got me onto like researching elimination diets and things like that. And so I decided I was going to take out a few, like the you know, the common foods that tend to be a problem: gluten, dairy, sugar, corn, soy. Not that they were eating huge amounts of that, but I mean, apart from the gluten and dairy, obviously, but the other stuff they weren't really eating huge amounts of. But so we tried that for the summer. So by now we're like May, and I thought, great, they've got the summer coming up, and for the summer I'm going to take everything out and see what happens. And so that's what I did. And within 10 days of eliminating these foods, 10 days, 10.
Wow, brilliant.
She was on 0 over-the-counter medication. She did not have the sniffles. She did not have tiredness. She had color. She was running. She was like a different child. Within a month, she was off all steroids. Probably within less than a month. I think it was 3 weeks off all steroids. And it was probably me being paranoid, not wanting to take them away too quickly. And by the end of the summer, she was like balancing on the edge of the sidewalk with her brothers and sisters, something that she had never been able to do. In fact, her balance issues was quite bad. She didn't learn to ride a bike till she was 9. So that was the one that sort of took longest to come back. But, you know, I had a glimpse of it that summer, that it was possible. And all that was great. My mum came to visit us 6 weeks after we started the elimination diet, and she was like, "What have you done to her?" You know, she was like,
how old was she at this time then? So was she
3.5?
Okay, so this was really in that third year. Wow,
Yeah.
that's fascinating and that's huge.
But the biggest thing was, so when we got back to school, my son, who does have learning issues, which at the time were not diagnosed, but we knew something was up, so he was seeing an occupational therapist and he had learning support outside of school. His teachers are telling me, it's amazing, he's matured so much and so much has changed. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. By the 3rd time, they're like, okay, what are you doing to him? Because this is not the child that we were seeing before the summer. And I was like, look, you know, I haven't done anything. His little sister is on an elimination diet, and I fed all 3 of them the same thing. And the occupational therapist looked at me and said, he's gluten-free. And I said, yeah, he is. And she said, oh, all the children who come see me should be gluten-free. And I was like, what? Because at this point, I'm still not clicking.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay.
And so, you know, this is only like 4 or 5 months in. Exactly. You know, all these changes have happened, but actually all I've changed is their food. And so that was really amazing. And then that's when I started like buying books about gluten and researching the doctors that were doing stuff with gluten, like Dr. Tom and Dr. Rodney Ford in Australia and New Zealand. And so learning more about that. And that's when I said, okay, that's it. I'm doing the nutrition course. And I started a naturopathic nutrition course. And then sort of that's how I then built the little steps to then get us to complete reversal that we got a few years later.
Okay. That's such an amazing result in such a short space of time. But I mean, I think that's what a lot of people listening should bear in mind, is that kids can respond so much quicker than adults, yes. Right? And yes. When you say 10 days, that it was like almost day and night in what she was able to do and how different she was, it's great. So, okay, let's skip over to your son then in terms of the neurological orders. So is there anything else that you wanted to complete on that, on your daughter?
Well, my daughter, there is a neurological connection there in the sense that in her case, the reason the balance issues and all that is actually called gluten ataxia. And it's when gluten basically destroys the cells in your brain. So when you have celiac disease, gluten destroys the cells in your gut. And there are other manifestations of gluten sensitivity, intolerance, whatever you want to call it. And in her case, it was affecting her nervous system. And that's why we had these issues. And the breathing is possibly also connected to that, because obviously the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system controls the breathing issues. So there is a connection between the two. It's just obviously in him, it was much more obvious in terms of his learning and how it changed the way he was at school and what he was able to do.
Yeah. Okay, so just touching on your daughter then again, her lung issues completely resolved from that? You were able to take off all steroid medication. Did she have any other episodes again after elimination?
Nope. So that summer I had bought, because I was fed up. Wherever I went, I had a big nebulizer. And that summer I bought a little pocket nebulizer to take with us on holiday. I have never used it, ever. To this day, it's still in its box.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that's amazing.
So,
yeah. Oh, and so tell us about her rheumatoid arthritis symptoms then.
So the first time it happened, it was a morning and she was calling out from her cot. And when I went to see her, she was lying down, and usually she would be standing up, holding on. And when I tried to lift her up, she fell down again. And I was like, what's going on? And that was the first time that it happened. And so for her, it was very much swelling. So you could see her knees, especially, were very, very swollen and red. And she was too young to tell me if there was particular pain, but I mean, you could see that she was uncomfortable. And how it affected her mostly was that before that, we used to call her Dora the Explorer. She would always walk everywhere and have her backpack. But since that episode, she always wanted the pushchair. So that was really how it worked. And again, like I said before, she never had any gut issues that I could see. But later on, a few years later, when I started doing functional testing, when I realized such thing existed, she had a Giardia infection, and Giardia can give rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. So who knows how long she had that infection for? Was it connected? You know, sometimes we want to know exactly what happened, and sometimes it's just not possible to know the exact things. But there are lots of pieces that could be connected. And I think at the end of the day, as long as you're moving forward and you're making progress, then, you know, the exact root cause, it's great if we find it, but we don't always.
Yeah. So her rheumatoid, or her RA symptoms also resolved through the diet change?
Completely. She never had another flare up.
Okay.
And we later on, when we started doing more functional testing, she had quite a few other, apart from rheumatoid related antibodies, she had quite a few autoimmune related antibodies that were out of range. So the test that we used tested 24 autoantibodies. She had 22 out of range. And when we continued working, and this is when, to all intents and purposes, she looked well. So she now looked well. It's just that I've done so much studying that I'm like digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's when I discovered that although she was much better on the outside, on the inside, there was still disease processes going on. And we completely reversed every single one of the 22, and they're now all within range. So we all have some autoimmune antibodies. That's normal for our body to have, but they need to be in a sort of controlled range. So at the moment, at the last checkup, they were still all in range.
Okay. So do you want to tell us what else you changed after doing all of that functional testing? Because as far as I understand, all you had done up to that point before you did all the testing was change diet. Was there anything else in terms of the functional medicine approach that you then started adding after diving deeper?
So the very first thing was adding to the diet. Then we went on to elimination diet, and we did quite a few rounds of elimination diet. And with every round of elimination diet, she was better. But at the time, the view was you eliminate and you reintroduce. And so I didn't know that there were possibly things that could never be reintroduced for her. Okay. Which in her case is gluten, but at the time I didn't, so I kept reintroducing it. What I did as I was learning, because at this point I'm doing my nutrition course, was I started adding some vitamins and minerals and amino acids like L-glutamine to help support the gut as we were doing this work. And again, you know, slowly probiotics, digestive enzymes, things like that, just to support. Because at this point, although I have no evidence that there's something wrong with her gut, I know from all the literature that everything is connected to the gut. So as well as eliminating, I was also supporting. And we probably did the elimination and support protocol twice a year.
Okay.
And then when I discovered the functional testing, interestingly enough, although yes, we have much more available to us, it was again diet that actually made the biggest difference. So it was, in order to get all of her antibodies back in range, what we had to do was not only eliminate gluten, but eliminate almost every single grain.
Because of the cross-reactivity.
In her case, the cross-reactivity was really bad.
Yeah.
And so when we did that, that's when we had complete resolution.
Wow. That's great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So even with all the functional testing, diet was still, in her case, the strongest intervention.
I think that's a very strong message, because I think so many people, when they're going to, whether they're going to a naturopath or anything, they think it has to be completely complicated. And they're looking for really esoteric answers to their complex problems. And that's what I try to drive home to my clients and people in my audience, is that just with diet alone, you can get so far. And if you've done all of the diet changes and still then haven't resolved your issues fully, then you can dive deeper. But if you haven't mastered that diet change, for me, it's very difficult to make progress further, right?
Yeah, it's like diet is one of the pillars. So if that's not in place, you can throw all the supplements you want at it. It's, you know, it's sometimes people like replace supplements, like replace medications with supplements. And that's not the idea. The idea is not to get you to take a pill for the rest of your life. Although, I mean, obviously in some cases you might need to. You might have some genetic mutation that means that there are certain things your body really struggles to do, and in the world where we live in today, you might need to take something to support your body for the rest of your life. That is possible, but it shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to take something for the rest of your life to fix something. If you're going to fix it, then you fix it, and then it's finished. At least that's how I see it. And the maintenance work is the lifestyle pillars. You know, it's how much sleep you're getting, it's how stressed you are, it's how well you're eating, it's how you're moving. You know, the lifestyle of our entire family changed at that time. So whilst you know, the element that made the biggest difference to her was diet, the reality is, like, you know, we were all much more aware because of her and for her, but we were all much more aware. I mean, it is through her illness that I discovered that I could actually help my son who had learning difficulties. It is through her illness that I realized that her sister was just as sick as she was, but because all she got was the occasional skin rash, it wasn't life-threatening, nobody ever paid any attention.
Yeah, wow.
So, you know,
the symptoms, right? The symptoms are telling us a story.
Yeah. So, but, you know, paying more attention to all the other things, you know, how much we were sleeping and how we were interacting with each other and making time for each other, all these things that, you know, they can sometimes get lost when you've got a big family because we're all busy doing our own thing. All these things sort of started taking a different priority, and they are a huge part of what makes us healthy and make, you know, they say that 80% of health is lifestyle and only 20% is down to genetics. And having been through this experience, I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, it's all in our hands, right? It's in our choices that we're making every single day.
A lot of it is.
A lot of it is, yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit then about the connection with ADHD, which your son was experiencing. So he was experiencing learning difficulties, is that correct?
He was experiencing,
how did you notice that in him?
Learning difficulties. So I'd noticed it since he was very, very young. So he had sensory integration dysfunction. He had, eventually I found out, had dysgraphia and dyslexia, and but we didn't get a diagnosis for that till he was about 14. So the sensory integration we knew when he was little, but he'd always been quite sensitive to like loud noises and certain things. He had like the odd OCD type behavior as a toddler, but all of this was always dismissed. So, you know, with my friends, it was like, oh, because he's the elder, you know, he's your only child at the beginning, because I have 2 stepchildren, but they were much older, so they weren't like interacting in the same way. And then when he started going to school and I was questioning the teachers were like, oh, he's a boy, they tend to be a bit lazy. And I'm like, well,
the society just finds a reason.
There was always a reason, but, you know, at home, it was a nightmare. I couldn't get him to do homework. We had screaming and shouting battles every day. It was horrendous. I mean, there's a time of my life that I really, you know, do not like to think about. And I feel so sorry now that I know what I know. I feel so sorry that he had to go through this, because, you know, there were reasons and there were answers and he could have gotten help.
Wow.
But
how old was he at that time that you started changing diets?
When I started changing diets, he was 9. Yeah.
Okay, so definitely 10. Halfway through primary school.
Yeah.
Almost yeah.
So the things that I noticed, so the very first time we removed the foods, obviously my little one I told you about, her sister, she had been quite a sort of confrontational child, and suddenly she became this angelic creature. That, you know, I was like, what's happened there? And my son had developed migraines at the age of 7, like really bad. Like he would throw up when he had a migraine, and it was just horrible. And
how
I was told,
dealing with that? OTC meds then, or
over the counter, yeah. And I was told that it probably ran in the family, so, you know, there was nothing that was going to be done there. So he had developed the migraines, and he had almost constantly had mouth ulcers. And after the first elimination diet, all the mouth ulcers disappeared and never came back, and the migraines disappeared and never came back.
I love that you're picking up on these symptoms that people are not noticing as something that could be a food sensitivity.
To be honest, even I didn't know.
Yeah, no, none of us do. None of us do, right? Until we learn about it and how things can change, and we end up living with so many of these symptoms that we think, okay, this is just normal. I'm supposed to get sick every so often, you know, or I'm supposed to, yeah, of course I'm going to get mouth ulcers or whatever, or of course I'm going to get bloating or burping and that kind of thing. So we just shrug these symptoms off. Okay.
Yeah, it's true. And actually, because I work with kids, quite often when the parents make changes for their kids, they apply the changes to themselves as well, because it's just easier. And they come back saying, oh, I feel so much better. I didn't know I could feel like that. I was like, yes. But also, if you think about it, so going back to these kids that have neurodevelopment issues, if you think about it, like, how do you feel about learning when you've constantly got a headache or a tummy ache? How do you feel about, you know, how are you do you feel like getting up and learning new things and trying new things and trying different approaches? You don't. If you're fatigued, if you're
brain foggy,
exactly. So, you know, a lot of the times what I see is that all these parents have been told to do additional therapies, or sometimes they've been told to give medication. That's, you know, up to them to decide whether that's the right thing for them. But the additional therapies are like the way to go for these kids. But the reality is, you're wasting your money if you're just doing the additional therapies and you're not addressing the basics, because how is your child going to learn to the best of their ability if they're feeling rubbish?
I need you though to express to the parents out there, because and a lot of people don't make that connection, right? And you had to go through this to learn the connection between brain function, especially these neurodevelopmental orders, and food sensitivities, right? So how do you coach your clients? Okay, they come to you with an issue, but they've already got buy-in. They've already heard that you can help with kids with neurodegenerative orders. For somebody who's out there that hasn't made any connections to diet, how do you start that conversation?
Well, I generally start that conversation really from where I started, and all I wanted for my child was for my child to have the best possible life, and for my child not to necessarily be defined by her diagnosis, and to just feel as good as she could. I never ever started this thinking I could reverse anything, and I certainly don't promise anybody that I can reverse anything. It was just a miracle that it happened for us. It might happen, it happens to other people, I know it does, and I think we should all have that hope. But it was never, I never went in saying I'm going to reverse this. What I went in saying is, I want my child to have the best possible life. I want my child to thrive despite the hand that she was dealt. And I think that's where we start with all parents. All parents want that for their kids. It's not an alien feeling. It's not an alien thought. That's what we want for our children. And so I think that's where you start, because there is always something that you can do, no matter how small. Mm-hmm. You know, you may not be able to reverse ADHD, or autism is such a big spectrum. Some children are recoverable, others is very difficult, and it's too big a topic to go into. But the reality is, you can still improve their quality of life, mm-hmm. even if you don't reverse it. And I think that's the starting point. The starting point is, what can I do to improve my child's life today? And then you build on that, and you build on that, and you build on that. Had I not been studying, I would have been very happy after the first elimination diet. I had a different child. Mm-hmm. It's only because I started studying that I was like, actually, let me check this. Let me check this. Let me check this. And then I got to the bottom of it. Had I not done that, I wouldn't have gotten to the bottom of it. And she would still be reasonably healthy today. She wouldn't be the same as she is, but she would be reasonably healthy. And to me, that would have been okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because all I wanted for her was to function in her world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. So you focus on kids up to what kind of age?
I see kids, the majority of the kids I see tend to be quite sort of young, primary, like under 6. But I have also seen, at the moment, I have a teenage client, and sort of everything in between. Mm-hmm. But it tends to be where it's easier to do the interventions is certainly under 5 and 6, because parents still have a lot of control of what goes on, and you haven't entered all of the sort of peer pressure, you know, wanting to be like others, and teenage years is difficult. Yeah. So the ones I see that are older, the parents have the children's buy-in.
Yeah. Okay. And so how much of what the work you do is coaching the parents through the change then?
Oh, a lot.
Probably most of it, right?
Yeah, most of it. It's really funny. Like, even the ones that have buy-in and they come in and they know that they're going to have to eliminate some things, and the first question is like, okay, when can we put it back in? It is so funny. Yeah. And then, you know, you come back, we say, okay, well, you know, let's just do this and see where we are in, like, it depends on the case, like maybe 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. And it's so funny that when we get to that point, I'm like, you know, would you like to try and reintroduce? And they're like, oh no, maybe we wait a little bit longer, because they suddenly have their kid back. Mm-hmm. You know, some of these parents, their children go through these phases where they're completely absent and they feel like they're losing their kid. And when that doesn't happen anymore, and there's a good chance that what they were feeding them is what was contributing, they're like, oh no, maybe we don't need that anymore. So it's quite funny. You think you just have to be open-minded enough to try. Like you said, kids respond really quickly. So as long as you've got the commitment to do it properly, it doesn't need to take very long for you to see results. Obviously, every case is different. I've had people with cases that are really complicated where diet alone is not really gonna. Of course, it makes a difference, but you don't see it in the same way.
So take us sorry.
No, go on.
Ask. So in those kinds of cases, because it sounds like with everybody that comes in, you start with diet, like most of us do, right? Yeah. You were taking a whole picture, but often we're starting with diet. Then where else are you going with kids on the spectrum? What kinds of things should parents be looking out for or thinking about at least?
I think, so my role is more like to connect the dots for them, to help them see where issues might be, to help them see what could be contributing to their kids. So with kids on the spectrum, for example, gut health is a huge thing. It's so big, but unfortunately not many doctors in conventional medicine talk about it. And so just bringing that awareness that it is a possibility. And because of the gut health, they tend to have nutritional deficiencies. And so then that feeds into the system, and they tend to maybe have detoxification issues. So sometimes they have toxicity in their body. And so it's really depending on the case, and by doing the history and the timeline, like you said, we sort of try and see, okay, where could it have gone wrong here, and where can we start the support? And then we try and do like everything that we can do initially, changing the diet and supporting the body here and there, and so on. And then if they want, they can get guidance as to, what sort of functional testing might be beneficial for their child. And then they can decide if they want to go down those routes or not. My job is more to sort of to be a guide and hold their hand and support them through and help them when they make a choice. Because the other thing that happens is I made so many mistakes. I was trying to help my daughter, and it was okay because I was studying at the same time. So when I made a mistake and I saw the outcome, there was a little part of me that was like, okay, A, I knew where to go and ask for help, and B, sometimes I knew the answer. But imagine that you don't have that, and you give your child something, or you change something in their diet, and your child goes mental. Is that a good sign or a bad sign?
Good question, right?
Exactly. Sometimes it's a good sign. Sometimes it's a good sign because it means they are becoming more aware. But in a child on the spectrum, becoming more aware means a lot more frustration. Frustration means bad behavior. So it's not always bad, but you just need to know, like,
how to read it.
How to read it, and what is it that I did that, because sometimes it's obvious, yes, that's just not working. But sometimes it's actually, no, actually it is working, but we just need to go slower.
Yeah.
So that's sort of having someone to ask questions. I was so lonely when I was going through this. Not having someone that I could, just talk to. And the other thing is, love my family, but they were not on board.
I know what you mean.
And it is a lonely road when they're not on board. They are on board now that they've seen the results.
Yeah. But it takes.
But they were not on board at the time.
Exactly, and that's what a lot of our clients are coming up against, right? They don't always have a supportive environment. So where else are they going to get the support? And so, I try to create community as well with people that are going through similar issues. It might not be exactly the same kind of diagnosis, but people that are going through similar challenges and need to make changes together. Yeah, that always helps.
Yeah, it always helps not to feel alone.
Yeah. So what is one takeaway or one message you'd really like to pass on to parents, whether they have a child suffering from neurodevelopmental orders or a child suffering like your daughter with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis or these breathing episodes?
Well, I think whatever your child is going through, I think you should not lose hope that there is something you can do. And also believe in yourself that you are the person who knows that child better than anyone else. And if you believe that something can be done, then it can be done. Because as parents, we have a lot of power, but we've got this sort of learned helplessness where we rely on the experts. but we sometimes forget that we are the experts when it comes to our children. Nobody knows that child better than you do. No matter the best intentioned doctor in the world will not know that child the way you do. And even when I guide parents, a big part of my role is to empower them, to teach them to believe in themselves, to believe in what, because I might miss something because it's not my child.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if somebody says, oh, this happened, well, is it normal for your child for this to happen? Because it might be completely normal. So believe in yourself, believe that there is always something you can do to change or to improve your child's situation, and have hope, because we all need hope.
Absolutely. That's a great message. Thanks so much, Daniela. It was great chatting to you. So for anybody that wants to reach out to you, find out more about working with you, or any information, I don't know if you write a blog, how can they get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me via my website, is www.positivehealthspace.com. There are some articles on there. There is a way to message me. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Positive Health Space. And for those who want to try a few things and see what they can do themselves, I believe you're going to put down in the notes.
Tell us about your freebie.
The symptoms reference checklist. So basically, I've tried to come up with a few things that parents can do for common symptoms that children have. Although it's written from a neurodevelopment perspective, these symptoms can happen to anyone really. And so as you go down the symptoms list, you can just see, you know, what are the simple interventions that you can do. And they go from the simplest to the more complicated, where you might need a practitioner or a doctor involved. But it means that you know what questions to ask and where to look next, and what could be the issues. So it gives you a little bit of empowerment and a little bit of guidance if you want to start doing something yourself. Please remember that food is very powerful, and if your child is on medications, you need to check with your doctor before you change things. But aside from that, you know, it just gives you an idea of what you could do, what you could start, where you could start. You know, simple things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm all about people trying things on their own as well. I mean, we need to open ourselves up to this idea of experimenting, obviously, with intelligently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's brilliant that you're offering that kind of resource. So thanks very much. I will put all of that in the comments below the video. So I thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you for having me. It was really great fun.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.